Hello and welcome to Talking Perspectives. I'm your host, Nick Andrews, and beginning with this week's episode, let's begin reviewing this week's happenings from Sonic Perspectives. Following up on our episode number 5 discussion about The Sea Within, Scott Medina has since published a review of the self-titled debut album, as well as an interview he had with the guitarist Ron Stolt. Very entertaining interview, definitely listen to that. The always busy guy Scott also continued the Road to Prague stock series. He interviewed Dave Kersner about his new project In Continuum. Eric Woody put out some news about a new video from Primal Fear. Joel Barrios had some news on Halcyon Way. Also, he posted the video for Truth from the new Devin Townsend live album, and also told us that Riverside signed a new deal, will release an album in September called Wasteland and tour thereafter, and that Tarja will be releasing a live album. Mark Boardman reviewed the sophomore release from We Came From Space, a band featuring the now much more well-known Bill Hubauer of the Neil Morse Band. Austin Coquelle has a review out of the new Arena album Double Vision. Rodrigo, who's here with us, reviewed the new Don Airey album One of a Kind. And he also put out a story about Iron Maiden kicking off their new tour in Europe. And finally, Gordon Ireland wrote a review of Peace, the new album from Graveyard, which we'll talk a little bit more about in our next episode. So, now let me get to who we have here for our discussion this evening. Joining once again, Rodrigo is here.
Hello, hello. Good to be here.
Mr. Jordan Blum is once again joining us.
Hello, hello.
And we have two guests here this evening. First off, from the band Kairos, he is the keyboardist. He is one of the vocalists in this song, and usually the main vocalist. He is Mr. Adam Warren.
Hello, hello.
Now I'm going to cut his music and introduce our second guest, also from Kairos, but from his own band, Edge of Reality. He is Mr. Joey Frivola.
No, I'm not.
No, he's not. All right, so the reason we have you folks with us is we are talking about a Facebook post that Adam made. And I am going to read that now because it sets up our topic here. The comment was that we had existed 30 years ago, we'd be huge, which is a really nice comment, a lovely thing to hear, though thought-provoking, especially given our modern influences. My instant reaction to that was actually from a technological point of view. One of the things that give Kairos its sound is that we, or maybe I should just say I, take liberties with our final track count and will happily run hundreds upon hundreds of layers of instruments in a project to create the dense and multi-textured sound. Our record track count for the human voice on Vox Humana, all 44 minutes of it, was assembled in a single Logic Pro session and reached a total count of about 450 tracks. Now let me take a break in reading this and say, Adam, of those tracks, how long is the average recording snippet in there?
It really depends. It depends on what part. So if you've got like a vocal part, I'll normally do it sort of section by section, sometimes even line by line. If it's a guitar part, for example, with Joey, we'll normally do kind of a similar thing, section by section. If it's drums, on the other hand, we will try and go all the way through and then tackle any kind of problematic bits. And we kind of make notes as we go along of bits that we want to focus on after doing an initial all the way through take.
All right. Continuing on now, considering most studio reel-to-reel recorders limit at 24 channels and sometimes 32, etc., skipping ahead, our entire approach would be completely different. It really does make me wonder what our music would sound like if it were hit with the kind of technical limitations that we were just talking about. So that kind of brings us to our topic, and it's talking about music, how it's recorded today versus how it was recorded years ago. What kind of bands from yesteryears would sound like now, and what the bands like from now might sound like back then. And going into the biggest difference is, of course, the number of tracks you could have, and of course the freedom that something like Pro Tools and computers and things like that gives you now compared to what they had back then, and your ability to edit and fix errors on takes now. Joey, I know you do a lot of recording, of course, with Edge of Reality as well. How nice is it today knowing that if you screw up, you don't have to redo an entire song? You can just do 3 seconds if need be.
Oh, I don't think I would do music if that wasn't the case. I honestly don't think I could take that kind of working method, because my whole thing when I'm recording is that, well, I guess I should say my kind of philosophy on this has been kind of interesting recently, because I kind of realized that if you think about it, over time, studio music and live music have kind of almost diverged from each other. They're almost two separate mediums entirely at this point, kind of in a similar way to like plays and film is.
Yeah, and to that point, one of the things I hate about, and this is a topic hopefully for a future discussion, is favorite or least favorite live albums. But one thing I hate about live albums is when they sound like studio releases.
Exactly.
When bands take so much care, it so defeats the purpose for me. But you're right, you can do so much in the studio that when a band now has a true live release that isn't really touched up much, that really is live, it makes a definite big difference. Adam, on the keyboard end of things, at least I know you said vocals, it's line by line. How much do you usually do in a take for keyboards?
Again, I can easily respond with it depends. It's such a case-by-case kind of thing. Most of the time, working with the glorious phantasmalistic thing that is MIDI, I can sequence things and step input things where I don't even need to play them in. And some would call that cheating, but I call that using technology to its fullest abilities. And the thing is, I usually will not program in something that I know that I can't necessarily play, unless it's something like an effect or like a really fast arpeggiator happening in the background. I will usually program in something that I know I can learn and I can perform to my abilities. But again, it really depends. If I'm recording something that's audio based and that isn't like MIDI based, so for example, if I'm recording my piano that's sat behind me, that's going to be a section by section kind of thing.
All right, Joey?
Well, in stark contrast, I write and record things that I can't play all the time, and I hate myself for it consistently.
Yes, I see that firsthand all the time.
Well, the nice thing about Kairos is he has a second guitarist he can pawn it off on.
That is very true.
Now, Rodrigo, I know you don't have a lot of experience, in the realm of recording. You came into this, not knowing a lot. Is there something about the process, at least today, that you've had questions on or that you wanted to explore more?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, for example, about the live recordings versus studio. How much of that is actually touched on these days? I mean, because from listening to the albums, to the live albums, that even those that came up last week that I had access to, it seems so touched up. I mean, it's a stark contrast to, say, Peter Frampton's. Frampton Comes Alive, or Live After Death, even. So it's a stark contrast.
Real quick before they answer, you wouldn't be referring, we don't have to say it by name, but does it begin with H and end with Aiken?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Shots fired.
And the other one starts with F and ends with H warning as well.
Okay. But
These are way too cryptic.
Very. So go ahead, you guys. Tell us, from your take. I know neither of you have a live album yet, I don't believe, but, you probably have some insight into the industry. What's it like, after you record from there?
Who's going to go?
I guess, Adam, you could talk about what we did for those Middlesex videos.
Okay, yes. Well, typically, and this actually applies to studio recordings as well, I have a bit of a pet peeve when it comes to bodies of works that are really touched up to the point where you can hear that something's been done to it. When I hear a studio recording in itself, I'm kind of like, I really hope they've not gone like really obvious with the tuning or the touching up of the vocals, because that's the first thing that I'm aware of. If I hear vocals that have been tuned and it's obvious, I'm instantly like, oh my God, this is painful. And one of the, going back to live albums, there is a live album that is super duper touched up to the point that it's actually kind of comical. I think it's Spock's Beard's most recent live album they did, the Cruise to the Edge performance.
Live at Sea.
Yeah, that's beyond belief, because it's like not only are things touched up, but we've got entire parts that are overdubbed, but you can still hear the original part because it's bleeding through like drum mics and stuff.
I was there
It's
live.
just embarrassing, man. Like, come on.
And like Joey, I was also there live. Jordan, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to mention how Frank Zappa was like notorious for overdubbing guitar solos and different parts to the point where, as you said, like it was kind of comical that every live release of his, or a lot of them were like Frankenstein's monsters of like in studio and live stuff and hodgepodges. And I guess like only real diehard fans and collectors would know where certain things are dubbed in. But he immediately comes to mind when you talk about like fixing stuff up in the studio.
Yeah, I know. Like Peter Gabriel was really guilty of that. One of his live performances, the entire thing sounds just too perfect for a live performance, and this was in the early days of auto-tune, before pitch correction was really a thing. So you had just auto-tune, you set the key, hit a button, and you set the sensitivity. And this live performance, he just ran the whole thing, all of his vocals through auto-tune, and he sounds like a robot. It's ridiculous.
You ran it through auto-tune in post?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now one of the things I think that, kind of made this trend more popular is when the live DVDs started coming out, because back when you had mostly audio-only recordings, the big trick back in the day, aside from bands like Kiss who would just, ridiculously do things afterwards, was recording multiple nights. You could just, easily record audio in a bunch of nights of the tour and just, cherry pick your best performances. But now there's so much focus on needing to get video, and that's a lot more expensive to do, over the course of a tour as opposed to one or two shows. So it puts the pressure on those particular shows being, a lot bigger. I guess you guys probably know that firsthand. You guys aren't filming every show with, 5-6 cameras. It's just not practical.
Off the back of that, I actually kind of realized what Joey's referring to earlier about our two videos that we did for Lamb Badger and Monster, like the studio performance videos. They kind of sit in a weird, uncanny valley of studio recording meets live, because it is all of us performing and it's being recorded as a live performance, but the top secret sauce that is kind of being trickled on this product that is the eventual final video is the fact that this was about 4 or 5 different takes assembled, and we kind of took the best parts and edited them together to form one video.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that pretty much everyone who's doing a professional video like that, who's taking the time to record it, is probably going to do something similar, make sure it comes out well. But it's almost this big thing not to talk about it, or not to... It's so taboo when everyone does it. It's kind of, it's probably a long shot here, but Lance Armstrong and the bicycling thing, like, yeah, he was cheating, but chances are pretty much everyone who was 2nd through 10th was probably cheating as well, It
is one of those things, because I've noticed Stephen Wilson's been quite, he's been quite vocal about the fact that he uses pitch correction on his studio albums, and I'm sure he uses it on live albums as well. But he uses it tastefully in such a way that it doesn't sound obvious. If you've got a really good performance, full of energy, and you believe that you've really captured something, if there's like a slight flat note, sharp note here and there, I don't think there's any problem with nudging that so it sounds more correct if the performance itself is worthy of being kept. But just because that teeny tiny fault, you have to, if this was 30 years ago, you'd have to drop that. But we live in an age where you can just nudge it and it'd be fine.
And I definitely agree that I would rather have a performance, if you're going to correct, with a slight correction that leaves it still feeling live, than something that's perfect. Joey,
exactly.
You had a comment?
Yeah, you brought up the Lance Armstrong thing, and it's kind of a thing that I hear that perspective come from, especially non-musicians, quite a lot, which is, that whole meme of, oh, herder, if athletes can't use steroids, then musicians can't use autotune. Gotcha. But it's not really comparable at all. Like, you're not competing against anyone. Nobody loses anything by you having a better recording than they do. And at the end of the day, musicians just want to put out a good thing, and they want to make the thing as good as it can possibly be. So it's just not, I don't really see that mentality as making a whole lot of sense. And,
it's very much not a competition.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of making a good thing as good as it can be. Like, in the instance of our, with the take, keep in mind, even with like the Middlesex videos we did, a lot of different takes were used in conjunction with like video takes that had to be synced up and stuff like that. So they were not necessarily the same performance of the track.
Well, let me bring things back a little bit to the core of our discussion, and ask this question. Does anybody have an example of a band from today, somebody from the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, that you think
I already have a band
that would be absolutely screwed if they had to go back to the 70s and record an album?
I already have a band.
Go
My
ahead.
instant answer is Frost.
Okay, yeah, and that is, it's so layered. There's a lot of thickness to it, and it would have been a lot harder to replicate that back then, correct?
Absolutely. Hands down.
Yeah.
And the same
Probably.
thing with probably
Devin
like
Townsend as
It
well.
Bites, a similar sound, and probably the same issues. Jordan, you were about to say something?
I was gonna say Dream Theater. Probably.
Yeah, so was I. But go ahead.
Well, because
Why Dream Theater?
you talked about like how many layers could we add or how many different like levels or tones, and I think Dream Theater is often like lambasted as the quintessential like excessive prog metal band that's all show and little substance, which I don't agree with. But I think they would be kind of hard pressed to do a similar thing if they had such limitations. They do a lot of like overdubbing and theatrics and effects.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that. Dream Theater, especially compared to most prog bands of now, pretty much writes for their own band. Like they don't really do that much outside of what's in the band. Not to the level of like what Frost or even like Devin Townsend does.
Yeah, I have to agree with Joey. Well, I can see, Dream Theater would be limited. I don't think it nearly hits as hard as some of the other bands would be.
I think the key limitation here. Sorry, I think the key limitation here would be James's vocals, because they're, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, they've gone downhill very fast. So, and they're corrected even in studio. So,
I'm kind of curious as to how Dream Theater would have turned out if vocal pitch correction was not a thing, and whether or not Labrie would still be a part of the band.
Yeah,
I think at this point they would be hesitant to change singers, or even in the last 5, 6, 7 years. So I think, barring some major incident, I think Labrie will always be in the band for better or worse. I think he still puts forth a very good studio effort, so I don't necessarily see that as a terrible thing. And I loved I know I'm going off on a way tangent here, but on the last tour, he finally, how many years after Mike Portnoy left, finally learned how to banter with the crowd and tell stories and actually be engaging away from the music, which was a long time lacking from his live performances.
Mm.
Yeah,
He sounded good on the last Arion.
He what on the last Arion?
I was saying he sounded good.
Oh, well, that's because it's Arion, and everyone sounds good on Arion. Show me one example that defies that theory.
I don't think I can.
So let's flip it around now and go from the opposite end a little bit. Is there any band that did not quite make it to the modern era here that you think would have really benefited from modern technology that was pushing the limits so much of the recording technology at the time that now they would have been fantastic had they had these capabilities?
I got one.
Sure.
Gentle Giant.
Yes, especially with all the vocal work, probably a lot easier to pull that all off now.
Yeah, plus you see like a lot of live footage. You see them. I mean, part of it I think is the show, and more power to them that they could like switch instruments like that and take over each other's instruments. But I'm sure had they been around still, it would have been a lot easier, and they could have done a lot more, at least more easily.
Do you guys think somebody like Robert Fripp, perhaps, who was always kind of pushing the limits of music as is, would have had would have been pushing things to the limit studio-wise if he could have at the time?
I mean, I think he's always been at the forefront of pushing technology. So if he was kind of our age and growing up with the technology that exists now, I'm sure he would be at the forefront and using all of it to the best of his abilities.
He'd pretty much be doing vaporwave remixes, is what you're saying.
Oh, heck yeah, you know it, man.
Well, let's see here. And talking about, the old style of recording, one note that I have for this, thinking back, it's a band that we still do have, well, not really anymore, but, might put out another studio album. Anyway, Rush, a big part of why they stopped doing epics, aside from, naturally changing sounds, is they were so tired of having to try and make these long takes perfect. They got tired of recording songs like 2112. It was just too much for them, and after that era, it's why they never really returned to it. Joey, you had a hand?
Yeah, well, that is true, but I think part of that is also that Rush really, especially in those early days, super insisted on recording live, which they didn't even have to do then. They could have still recorded instrument by instrument if they wanted to.
That is true, and they did a fantastic job. Those albums from their golden era with Terry Brown, what a fantastic sounding run of albums. Rod?
Yeah, I was gonna say as well. I don't know when did the technology took like a steep incline forward, but even vapor trails, it would have been salvaged from the disaster that it was from a mixing standpoint.
And it was a disaster, Joey. A complete disaster. Sorry, go ahead.
Some of their previous albums sound worse. Anyway, continue.
That is a point, yeah. But I think down to technological limitation rather than creative choice to make it sound like a massive brick wall on your head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Rob. What was the rest of your point?
Well, what I was going to say was, in response to Rodrigo's question about when technology took a massive turn, it would definitely be the late 70s, early 80s, when there was a massive shift. You think about Rush as a perfect example. They had a sound, and within a less than 3-year period, they were suddenly doing power windows. That's a massive change from what was happening 3 to 5 years earlier.
Yeah. It's a steep incline from moving pictures to power windows for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. Or even Grace Under Pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and both musically and what it sounded like. Drums, oh my God, the electronic drums on Grace Under Pressure. Who would have ever expected that, you know?
Simmons pads.
Heck yeah.
So, yeah, Rush, always a perfect example for pretty much everything. And another good example for Rush, back in the day, the Byrds in the beginning of Xanadu, or just basically any outside sound that you wanted, you had to actually go and record it. You couldn't just look up the sound. You had to actively capture the sound, which could be a challenge depending on what you wanted. Now Adam just goes to YouTube and is like, yes, I can have this.
Yeah.
Well, you say that, and Joey will agree with this firsthand, and he knows how much I love sampling. We live in an age where our phones are fantastic audio recorders. So if I hear a sound, and actually, Nick, you've been in the receiving end of this.
That sounds dirty, but yes.
I'll whip my phone out, and I'll just be like, okay, I'm just gonna hit record on this cool sound that I'm hearing, and most of the time it ends up being used for something.
And in this case, that sound is drunken me rambling on at a Rosfest after party.
Yep, exactly.
Is this
And I can guarantee it will be used.
So, any, let's see, what do I got back here? We kind of covered that one. Jordan, any other thoughts that you had or questions?
No, not particularly.
All right, Rod, anything from you?
Do you guys think of any album that would sound more aggressive these days with the new technology? Maybe the Black Sabbath albums from the 70s.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right?
And the Led Zeppelin albums as well. They would sound much bigger if they were produced today. And whether or not that'd be good, I don't know.
Yeah, because of course we had the whole mastering debacle with things like power windows, so that bigger isn't always better. But what is it, for Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin? What bit of technology would have made those come to life more? What would be primarily responsible for that?
Particularly developments in guitar amps, I would say. Guitar tones have gotten a lot heavier overall and a lot more full-bodied since those days.
And for someone like Tony Iommi, that tone would be just so valuable.
Yeah.
Well,
think of what the gent bands can do now. Their guitars sound like machinery.
Yeah. Rare worse. All right, well, let's wrap up that section, and we are going to do our new midway section here, which is music news. I'm going to start with a few releases. This will come out on June 1st, Friday, and so we got a few releases from that day. This is mostly metal this time around, but Convictions, Hope for the Broken, Gruesome with Twisted Prayers, Cataclysm with Meditations, and Gonzo is going to be doing a review of that. Modern Maps with Hope You're Happy, Mortis with Perfectly Defectory Issue, Nervosa, Downfall of Mankind, and Witch Skull with Coven's Will, and one more, we'll get to that shortly. But also, I saw a neat article I wanted to mention quick because it goes back to an old Talking Perspectives episode. And if the guys who weren't here for this want to chime in, please do. But we're talking about the resurgence of vinyl, and there was a neat article in the BBC about vinyl superfans. And it defines a superfan by someone who shells out more than £400 a year for any particular medium, let it be vinyl, Blu-ray, or that. And that accounted for 72% of vinyl sales. So people either buy vinyl or they don't, pretty much. Super fans would have to purchase at least 19 albums to get to that £400. And it shows how niche the revival is, despite the record-breaking sales, which were 4.1 million vinyl albums in 2017. I'm not sure if that's worldwide or in just the UK, but it's the highest number in whatever that is since the 1990s. And vinyl still only accounts for 3% of the total music market, despite this huge resurgence that it's had. And for comparison's sake, vinyl was at 72% bought by superfans. Something like Blu-ray was at 61%, which is close. DVDs, only 11%. You know, DVDs are just a lot more mass market still. CDs are 32%, and console games are 34%. So anybody, Adam or Joe, you weren't around for that discussion. Any comments on that?
If you had asked me how much money I spent on vinyl back in 2011...
Hey, Adam, how much money did you spend on vinyl back in 2011?
All of my money. Everything that I could, all the money that I could possibly get went 100% on vinyl, and it led to the collection I have now. But since then, it's kind of tailed off, unfortunately, because I've had to, well, both because of having to divert my spending towards more responsible things, like food and general survival.
Loser.
But also because of just a change in, I don't know, I'm less obsessed with vinyl today than I am with it back then. I used to be really obsessed.
You used to be Steven Wilson about it.
I used to be.
But yeah, that's just kind of thing that people who are into vinyl, that was the whole point of the story, are usually really into vinyl. The next bit really affects this group, minus Rod. But big news out of the... Well, I'm sorry, Rod. I don't think you've ever been to Rozfest. But
I haven't.
Big news in the Rozfest community. I'm going to read part of a statement from George here. The Majestic Theater in Gettysburg, PA has been a memorable host to us for the past 8 years, but even though our reputation continues to grow as the best North American progressive rock festival, our audience attendance has been slowly declining. As many of you are aware, we recently relocated to Sarasota, Florida. Our decision in selecting this location was not only because of its beauty, beaches, arts, and entertainment, because we believe Sarasota would make the perfect location for Rozfest to continue to survive and grow. And then scrolling down a little bit, I'm aware that this news may upset some of our supporters, but please understand that in order for Rozfest to survive, we're hopeful that our Rozfest family will give Sarasota a chance so that we can keep bringing you the best that progressive music has to offer. With much love and appreciation, George. Now, my thoughts on this, Rozfest just last year got new competition in the Northeast from Prague Stock and is moving to an area that is often underserved by smaller touring acts, at least in relation to the Northeast. But Sarasota is not far from Tampa, which is the port of call for both Cruise to the Edge and the Moody Blues Cruise, both of which happened in February, quite close to Rozfest in May. So I'm interested in seeing if this move has a positive impact on attendance that they're hoping for. Now that I know 3 of you have gone, multiple times, what do you think of the move? Anyone can speak.
It's more convenient for me.
Well, yeah, that's because you're a native Floridian.
I mean, for me, either way, I'm going to be flying over. So I'm both sad and excited.
And that is kind of the same reaction I have on a personal level. I'm definitely sad that it's a lot less convenient. I'm in Pennsylvania. It was so easy to drive there. And now it's, as long as your car doesn't short circuit on the way, it's a very easy drive.
Like that could ever happen.
Yeah, like that would ever happen. But, now it's like you have to fly, which makes it less convenient. But it is what it is. I do hope that they see the success from it. And one other bit of Rozfest-related news, my favorite from the festival, Florida Lodo, signed to Melodic Revolution Records. So cool to see that happen to them on the heels of their big show. And that is what I have for everyone in music news. And of course, now as I'm about to start the next topic, my app for playing stuff dies. Okay, so one other release from June 1st that I haven't talked about is from this band. Alright, so that was Ghost, and Prequelle is coming out on June 1st via Loma Vista Recordings, and we are going to talk not so much about the band, we'll talk a little bit about their music, but we're going to get into a bigger discussion about marketing in general and music and its importance and its impact specifically on Ghost. Now, I know Rodrigo was already familiar and had some feelings. I believe Jordan was somewhat familiar. You know, everyone's kind of somewhat familiar. I'm kind of a Ghost fan as well. But, you know, their first album came out in 2010, and now they're one of the biggest bands in metal. They have 2 arenas booked on their current tour. So obviously, whatever they're doing right. And the crux of my question is, do they, on the basis of their music, deserve that success, or is it, you know, a good chunk just because of the marketing and the appeal that comes from elsewhere? And, you know, just so we'll get it out of the way, and we haven't heard from him much, Rod, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, when I agreed to participate today, I told you guys I was going to be the counterpoint, because I'm not really a big fan of Ghosts. Even though I saw them a couple of times actually live, I owned one of their records, is the one with the church on the cover. Guess which one that is? You can't, because all of them have churches on the cover. That's not a problem for me. But the thing is, I mean, I get the marketing plot. There's a lot of marketing behind them. The stage show is good. It's very good. I mean, it's impressive. The visuals are okay. But musically, I'm not a fan at all. I think they're, in this particular track that you just showed, I think they sound like a poor man's journey. But, and overall, I think there's a lot to be developed here, particularly in tone. The guitar tones are awful. The vocals, I'm not a fan. But they're having time to grow. I mean, the good thing is that they're having time to grow. They have like 5 or 6 albums now. It's a change for me, because usually the record companies bet on one hit on the first album, or else they don't progress, or they don't proceed with the contract. But with Ghost, I think they're having time to develop. But we'll see. Maybe they change into something I like more. But for the time being, I think they fall flat.
All right. And I'm kind of in the middle ground to where I enjoy them. But I definitely think that because of their image, because of what they have been able to do outside of music, I do think that they are certainly ahead of their time progression-wise. I don't think they're necessarily a band based on their music that should be playing, you know, arena shows at this point, yet here they are. Has anyone other than me had the chance to see them live before?
I saw them twice. So I saw them in an arena in Rock in Rio in 2013. The crowd had no idea how to read these guys, and it was like the air had been sucked out of the whole stadium completely. It fell a bit flat. But second time was a bit better. It was here in Toronto. They were opening for Mating again. I think the crowd dug them to a much larger extent, and I think that made a difference for me, at least, and I could really understand what they were about. So I enjoyed that a bit more. But the first time, you know, they were completely off.
All right. And Jordan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, Nick, that I'm in the middle. I listened to all 3 albums of theirs today, actually, because I wasn't too familiar with them. And I definitely hear a progression from one to the other. I probably like the third one the most. But I think taking the image away from it, it's good. But I mean, obviously, the first album especially reminds you of like Blue Oyster Cult. And it's all very like serviceable, and it's interesting enough for me. But without the image, I think they would never be as like big as they are, and as cryptic and mysterious and have the allure. I think it's a lot of the image. And what I find kind of interesting about it is like, you know, they know what they're doing with the image, and more power to them for coming up with all this. But their imagery and their whole sort of like visual gimmick is far more like evil and heavy and dark than the music is. If you didn't hear them, like when I first just saw them, I expected like a death metal band. and then you listen to their music, which is fairly accessible and conventional and melodic and easy to get into. It almost is incongruous, I think, to their imagery.
Joey or Adam, any thoughts on Ghost?
I'll let Joey go first.
Almost everyone in Edge of Reality really likes Ghost.
Except you?
Really. I don't mind them. I've never liked what I've heard enough to really check them out. They've always kind of just struck me as pretty, I don't know, just generic rock with some kind of choiry bits, which is not bad. It's just not really, I don't know, it's never struck me as super interesting. I enjoy their satanic gimmick. I think it's hilarious. Yeah, and it certainly makes for amazing stage shows. Like most of the band went to see them in Nashville the other day, and I just kept getting pictures of all this crazy nonsense happening on stage with like stained glass windows and different costumes, and I think that stuff's awesome.
Yeah, Adam.
See, now I think image plays a big role, generally speaking, when it comes to music, and people, depending on the genre, of course, people will come for the image and sometimes stay for the music. Again, I got to stress, depending on the genre. And I think with Ghost, the image has played a massive part in pushing them to the success they've got. I don't think it's to do with the music. I think it's to do with the image. And people, once they hear the music, because it's so accessible and so easy to get into, because it's uplifting, it's catchy in some parts. It is very serviceable music, which may be a bit harsh, but it is what it is. People come for the image and they stay for the easy to get into music.
And I agree that the music has to be to a certain level. Like, no matter how good the stuff outside is, the music has to be at least to a certain level for people to care and stick around. Jordan, you had a comment?
No, I was just going to mention that you just said reminds me of like Robert Smith and The Cure, and so who's often associated with like kind of one of the first goth artists and sort of popularizing goth. It's not like, I think Ghost is a more extreme example, but you think of like goth, or I guess which led it to emo, you might think like The Cure is heavier than they actually are based on how the lead singer like uses makeup. And I think Ghost is like a more extreme sort of juxtaposition between visuals and music.
Now, and here's a question I have for you guys. With Ghost, Adam had mentioned a lot of their pop and other sensibilities in there. I think metal fans in general, especially some of the heavier metal fans that enjoy Ghost, would absolutely disown them for some of the stuff they do if it wasn't for that image. I
Agreed.
think they get a pass on, not to say that it's bad, because I enjoy especially the popular side of their music, but I think a lot of their fan base would never, ever listen to something like that if it wasn't for the darker image that went along with it.
Totally.
It's genius.
Yeah, just to say that I agree with you. And the first time I heard about Ghost, the comment I saw was, "Oh, these guys, they're the nameless ghouls. No one knows who they are, blah, blah, blah. There's all the mystique around them." That's what got me interested in them. Who are these guys? What are they doing? But then once the music kicked in, I thought, what's special about it? So it still hasn't clicked with me, to be honest. And I have a question for you guys. Those of you who are musicians, wearing those masks on stage, don't you guys think that it's hard for them to play while wearing those masks? Or
it must be a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think was that like a problem for Gabriel in Genesis when he went like full on Gabriel in Genesis.
In a giant penis suit.
Yeah, I think that was part of it.
Oh yeah, when he had to kind of reach the mic down into his suit.
Take music out of it completely. Just think of whatever your normal day job is, and think of covering your face and limiting your ability to see or to breathe or whatever it may be. No matter what you're doing, that's got to be a negative part of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I have to applaud them for what they're doing. It must be tough to perform on stage wearing those masks, and in some cases prosthetics. I see with the lead singer, there's that mask that he's got that is almost like a prosthetic, and it's they've certainly committed to something that is definitely working for them.
Now, speaking of that, I was watching, and I asked everyone else to watch. They had a series of 3 videos to introduce the new Papa, which ended up being Cardinal Copia. And that sort of mystique, again, that kind of went along with the band is what the fans that follow the band love. And I know Joey in particular, I think back to Edge of Reality and their video introducing the ideas of parallel concept albums. It was a totally different thing. It was humorous, but it's like this is this thing to focus on that isn't necessarily the music. And I think it's great for any band to have that, and I think Ghost has just pulled it off in a very successful way. I don't think those videos were even that great for the most part, but
they weren't. They weren't.
They remind me of Rob Zombie movies.
But here's the other thing. I also asked everyone to watch the videos from the new album, and Rats. I think Rats is a fantastic video. I think that's one of the best music videos I've seen in the last 5 years.
It is. Yeah, it's really good. We were commenting on new recording technologies. I think Ghost can use new marketing technologies pretty well because they understand the social media, how to work better towards social media and catapult their success. And Rats is a good example of that. And the other video as well, they show all those personalities digging their new song, Dance Macabre. I think it was a good idea as well.
Yeah, and it was such a juxtaposition, too, because Rats has a little bit of pop sensibilities, but here you had this more traditional metal sound with Rats, and then you had Dance Macabre, which is just, hey, here's this pop song for everyone to dance to.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing how well they have done that. And one of my favorite things about the series of videos is I actually had to stop and make sure I could correctly identify the casket that the old papas were in. Being a funeral director, I actually had to make sure I could identify that casket, just like I do anytime I see one in popular movies or TV or anything like that. And that is just, when else are you going to see? So at the end of the video, it makes mention of it, and I had a friend that went and posted pictures. Their VIP packages includes your chance to see the old papas, in their caskets at these shows. When in a million years did you ever think you would see something like that?
There you go, marketing technology, new marketing trends.
They are the guar of things outside of the show that aren't necessarily, not that they don't do it in the show, but they just, there's so much there to digest and follow, and there's something to talk about. And I think it's important. It keeps people attached and entertained. And I'm sure, Adam, Joey, you guys constantly have to look for ways to try and draw people in. It's just part of the deal.
It's tough. It is very tough. So I have a load of respect for what they're doing.
Doesn't it kind of play into like tradition of theatrics and how many artists in the past have used, not to use gimmick as like a pejorative, but just like it's always kind of more about the music, or about more than the music. So I think they're just sort of like not the latest, but one of the latest doing it, and I think they're doing it really well.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said about how at the end of the day, well, not just me saying, but you guys saying as well, at the core, it's simple, serviceable music, and it's good, but it's nothing that is groundbreaking, nothing that is changing the musical landscape. It's very much, it's so obviously down to the image for in terms of what you can blame for their success.
Yeah, compare that to say Alice Cooper or even King Diamond. What they did was completely innovative from a sound standpoint.
Yeah, actually, Alice Cooper is a really good example of that. It's just, in his day, it was kind of just basic kind of glam rock kind of stuff, but the image was kind of shock value. Yeah, and it had people talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be as simple as you look at, say, Muse, which, of course, Adam, I'm sure being from the UK, will have a lot of first-hand experience with. Their kind of gimmick was being large for the sake of being large. They just wanted to be a huge band and kind of made that their thing. They always just tried to go over the top with things, kind of willing themselves ahead.
Oh, yeah.
And have since become known for, that huge stage show and that huge spectacle. But becoming a spectacle was kind of how the tool they used to, be a spectacle. It's circular, but that's what it was for them.
Yeah, excess for the sake of excess.
In a way, yeah. All right, so that was our discussion on Ghost, and now we're going to kind of spur of the moment go into another topic that we're all interested in. We're talking a little bit here about the upcoming Dream Theater record. They're coming off of what I will call a very divisive record with the Astonishing and the tour that followed. Of course, they have since delayed things a little bit with the Images and Words and Beyond tour, and said they are using that for a bit of a motivation towards the new album. And say that they're going to harken back a little bit to a classic sound. They're not looking to copy Images and Words, but they're looking to touch back into that core of what is Dream Theater. So Joey, let's start with you since you are one of the Astonishing defenders. What do you hope for in the next album?
I just hope it's creative. That's really the only thing that I want from them. Because here's, in my opinion, the thing about Dream Theater that nobody talks about enough, and is one of the defining characteristics of them, is that they don't really do this. They've never really made the same album twice. All their albums are actually so different from each other when compared to what most other bands' outputs are. Mm-hmm. Like, for comparison, like Train of Thought to Octavarium, those were one album apart, and they almost couldn't be more different.
Yeah, and I would even go further as to say, even when they kind of came back to it with Systematic Chaos, I still think there's a large difference between Systematic Chaos and Train of Thought, even though they're both heavy for Dream Theater. They're still very different albums, I would say.
I agree completely. So that's just what, and honestly, that hasn't stopped since Portnoy left. Like, Dramatic Turn of Events, I guess you could argue, is probably kind of Dream Theater at their most, like, quintessential sounding in some ways. Like, it's kind of all the elements you'd expect, but it still doesn't really sound like any of their other albums in specific. And then the self-titled is bad, and then the Astonishing is just a complete left turn, and I love it.
Which is your mistake, but that's okay. Jordan, why don't you tell us what you want from the next album?
Well, from what just going back a bit, wasn't Dramatic Turns, wasn't there something about that copying?
That's a conspiracy theory.
Yes, there was a person out there who went to great lengths to document how a Dramatic Turn of Events was basically a carbon copy of Images and Words. I just found it to be some nut job's ramblings for the most part. Not to say that there wasn't a fair comparison here and there, but then again, every conspiracy theory has a shred of truth.
I think I asked Jordan Rudess about that. I forget what he said, but I think Dramatic Turn is their best album since 6 Degrees, honestly. I thought that was much better than the few before it, even though I like them too. And I agree with Joey that, like,
What'd you say?
I love Dramatic Turn.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's my answer. And I agree that I think every album is really pretty diverse. And I also think that they get a bad rap for favoring musicianship over songwriting. I mean, I think they do at times, and that's what I would want them not to do. But it's a cliche, but I think Scenes from Memory is easily their best album. I think it's arguably the best progressive metal album of all time. And it's because of the songwriting and just the focus and how it's so tight. And like, you look at like the best progressive metal instrumental passages aren't all about like the flashiness and the technique. It's about like the memorability. It's about the melodies. It's about like taking you through this journey, and every second is memorable.
Which is why, I'm going to interject here, which is why Stream of Consciousness is their best instrumental track.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's up there, I think, for sure.
Arguably, but...
I knew that would be divisive.
Like, just
continue.
Again, it's... You could be, like, over the top and theatrical, but not to the point of, like, I don't know, gaudiness. So, like, keep it tricky if you have to, but, like, focus on the songwriting and lyricism.
And I think we can all agree that if anyone has listened to Raw Dog in the last 5 years, definitely the worst Dream Theater instrumental.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. Rodrigo, what are your thoughts for the new album?
Yeah, first off, I agree with Joey that all of their albums sound very distinct from each other, but at the same time, they have this core identity where it's instantly identifiable. Since actually Images and Words, there's been so many copycats. And when you listen to a new band, copying a lick here and there or a time signature here and there, it's just instantly recognizable. So what I'm expecting from this album is at least give us a good drum sound. You know, everything else I can work around, but the drum sound, what's taking so long for them to figure this out? I mean,
I don't think it's coming, unfortunately.
Yeah, it was one thing to make that switch in drummers, but I agree, you know, the drums were always so memorable and so in the mix, and then for how many years now, it's just been a missing piece of the sound. I definitely agree with that. Adam, what are you looking for?
Well, talking about drum sound is obviously triggered me because
Triggered. Get it? Trigger drums.
Trigger, yeah. I have a love-hate relationship when it comes to drum production. I love the challenge of it, but it really is an absolute pain in the balls to get it right. I admit, like, Jesus Christ, that drum sound, especially on the self-titled, is like, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
It's like a cardboard box snare. And on the one hand, I can hear it as a listener and I can think, wow, that sounds like trash. But then and this is only a recent kind of thing, I kind of thought to myself, wait a minute, look at Mangini's kit. How the hell do you mic that up in an efficient way and not get like 5 million cross points of phase going out? And like, where on earth do you put the overhead mics? And how many channels do you need to mic that kit? Oh my dear God!
Well, he did put an album out with under the name of Into the Great Divide. Actually, he wasn't the primary composer there, but he helped the guy. He was through a connection with Richard Cheeky, and his drums sound phenomenal on that record. It came in December last year, I think, and it's just great. It's an instrumental album. His drums sound perfect and on point, and so it's not his fault. I think it's a production thing, and
that's interesting.
It might be Petrucci's choice of mix. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it comes back again to discussion we had at Rozfest and Rush with Vapor Trails. It'd be one thing if Mangini was playing for a no-name band and his drums came out sounding like that, but for Dream Theater, a band of that size, they definitely have the resources within them that sort of sound should not be making the final product. And I will compliment a lot of things they do, but that's just a big swing and a miss.
And live, they sound okay. Even in the live recordings they put out, Breaking the Fourth Wall and Live in Buenos Aires, it sounds okay. So what's the holdup, guys? I don't know.
Yeah, Joey.
Yeah. It seems clear to me that nobody in Dream Theater really has like that big an interest in production as like a craft, and so they really only seem to be their albums only really seem to sound as good as the people they work with. And as a result, they all sound quite different from each other. Apart from, I guess, recently the drums have had a similar sort of direction they've been going. But it's been like, Black Clouds sounds huge and amazing, whereas like Images and Words has like a very triggered and 90s sound. Mm-hmm. So I think they're just more interested in playing, and they don't really care.
So getting, away from the Astonishing, what I'm hoping for from the new album, one thing is I hope, and I think they've confirmed it won't be a concept album, which is great because music aside on the Astonishing, Petrucci, love him to death as a guitarist. The story on the Astonishing definitely leaves something to be desired. So breaking things down into some more manageable chunks, I think will definitely benefit them. Musically speaking, I am kind of with Joey in that I just hope they continue the progression of being different, even if it does have a more classic sound. And I would really love to see Mangini not only sound better, but maybe be that spark that helps change things. They have a very talented man who can write music, who hasn't seemed very involved in the process at all up to this point. It would be great to see him and maybe some others that maybe don't contribute as much get back into things to really help make a more diverse album. Jordan, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wonder if, or to what extent does Mangini still feel like the new guy and almost like he's somewhere between like a full member with equal, I don't know, agency and a hired session musician. Like, I wonder if he still feels like he is just there to play what they tell him to, what they come up with, or I wonder.
Well, yeah, that's one of the interesting things. I forget which albums it was true for, but at points, Petrucci was literally writing drum parts on a drum machine, and Mangini would say he would, change things and make them his own, whatever. But when you have a drummer like Mangini, why are you having a guitarist, I get that, he's writing the songs and has ideas for things, but I just feel like Mangini should be more involved from that process or earlier on when you have someone of his talent and level.
Yeah, I actually interviewed the guy behind Into the Great Divide. His name is Zach Zellon, and he said that, he sent Mangini a few demos of the songs, and when he came to record, he had 3 or 4 different ideas for each kind of song, so he can actually bring a lot to the table.
Yeah, I definitely believe it, and I think the Images, Words, and Beyond tour, I think, is going to be a big help. I do think that helped kind of relieve some stress on the band. It's obviously a easier tour for them to do in some respects, and that they were paying to a very an audience, happy audience that was happy to see those songs again. So I think they're going to go into the studio very fresh. And as always, they're have always been one of my favorite bands. Despite my disappointment with the last album, I am, of course, very excited to see what goes on with that. Any final thoughts on Dream Theater, anyone?
I just wish they had a more collaborative effort this time. Like you said, I think, Nick, some of the members seem on autopilot sometimes when they're writing a new album, particularly the John Mayung. We haven't seen a song from him in ages now, so I wish they collaborated more as a collective effort, and rather than just individual songs.
All right, Joey?
Yeah.
Well, John Mayung wrote lyrics for the self-titled.
He
wrote, what's that song?
He
Along
the
for the
one
Ride?
that's like the third, the end.
Along for the Ride, or?
No, one before.
I know which one you're talking about, but I can't think of the name.
It's like a 6 the whole time. Anyway, so he has contributed a bit. But yeah, the Astonishing was pretty much just Jordan and John.
Yeah.
And I believe, Adam, you had a comment you were trying to sneak in?
Well, I was actually going to say pretty much the same thing, but also the fact that, off of what Joey said, just more creativity. And I know this is a kind of contentious thing to say, but just make it more concise and really focus on the stronger, less fluffy bits.
I think with it not being a concept album, that will naturally happen to some degree. But yes, I definitely agree with that in general. So, this brings us to the end of episode number 7 of Talking Perspectives. I want to thank our contributors, Rodrigo and Jordan, and our guests, Adam and Joey, for being here. Thank you very much, guys. Talked Dream Theater, we talked technology and recording, we talked Ghost, we had some news in. So, once again, I am Nick with Talking Perspectives. Please go to the Sonic Perspectives Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, whatever the case may be. Like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, all that, so you get these Talking Perspective episodes as well as our audio reviews and bits like that as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.